Good afternoon and welcome everybody to today's webinar, What Next for the Beautiful Game? My name's Chris Smith, Managing Director of the Centre for the New Midlands, the only independent think tank for the region. COVID, social media boycotts, increasing pressure on government to reform the governance of the sport, the affordability of football, the SuperLeague, the gaps between the haves and the have-nots, staggeringly high pay packets of fairly average footballers, VAR, the list goes on in terms of the challenges facing the game that we all know and love. Today's webinar will attempt to unpick some of those big challenges and ask the question, what next for the beautiful game? How do we address some of these challenges? Football is obviously a big thing for the West Midlands, as in so many parts of the country. So when the Prime Minister started speaking about stepping in to cancel the Super League, it felt only right that we hosted a webinar to look at what next for the beautiful game. Today's session will begin with some opening remarks from Professor Simon Chadwick to help set the scene. We will then have two sessions to look at the big challenges facing the game. Broadcaster Gary Newbon, MBE, and Ashley Brown from the Football Supporters Association will provide their thoughts on the challenges facing the game from the perspective of the media and supporters. We will then hear from the clubs. So Anne-Marie Eden, who's the CEO of National League side Solihull Moors FC, is with us, as is Vinny Clark, who's the General Manager of Commercial Operations at Premier League outfit Wolves Football Club. So without further ado, I would now like to introduce Professor Simon Chadwick. Simon technically works in Paris, where he's Professor of Eurasian Sport at Emlyon, a global top 50 business school, although his travel has been somewhat restricted since he started working there due to the pandemic. He's also Director of CESI, which is the Centre for the Eurasian Sports Industry, based in Shanghai. Simon was previously a Director of Research for the Qatar World Cup. For the last 13 years, he's also been employed by UEFA. While Simon has also worked with organisations in football, ranging from Real Madrid and Manchester United to Adidas and Coca-Cola. Nowadays, he prefers to watch his football in Coventry's War Memorial Park. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Simon. Over to you.
Thanks for inviting me here today, and thanks to the audience for being here. I do live in the Midlands. I've lived in the Midlands for a long time, longer than I've lived anywhere else. So I do have a vested interest in what people say today and what we conclude from it. When Chris asked me to do this, I thought, well, how do I start? So I came up with the ingenious idea of I'll start at the beginning, which is always a good point to start at. And the beginning for me was that I was born and brought up in Middlesbrough. So I am a Middlesbrough fan. And when I was born, my dad was a season ticket holder at Middlesbrough. So my life plan at a very early stage, like after 5 minutes of being in this world, was already determined for me. When I was 1 year old, we went to live at number 10 Urson Park Road, right opposite the stadium. And then a little bit later, I remember going to my very first game with my dad. He used to have a really big raincoat, and he used to put me underneath his raincoat and take me through the turnstile. And just behind where he sat, he was a season ticket holder. My granddad was sat. And then just behind that was my great uncle. He was sat there. Unfortunately, I am Middlesbrough till I die, which if life doesn't kill me first, Middlesbrough definitely will. And so the reason for telling you all of this, I think, is that I live a kind of schizophrenic existence, because one half of me, that's my life. It's my family. It's my community. It's the connection I have with my hometown. I think about the first game I went to. I think about my favorite goal scorer when I was 8 years old, and so on and so on and so on. But what has happened to me since then is, just to take one example that Chris gave the introduction, I spend a lot of time, or I used to spend a lot of time, certainly in China, in Beijing, in Shanghai, very often talking to football fans and these kind of mythical figures that Super League clubs talk about, spending huge amounts of cash in places like Shanghai, I spend time talking to them and going to supporters club meetings and watching games and just generally trying to understand. And so, from having, if you like, socio-cultural origins and my fandom being based upon Middlesbrough, I'm now in a very different position professionally, in that some of these organizations with which many of us are familiar and some of us might have considerable gripes, I do find myself working with them. So that's my personal chronology, but there are really three kind of time periods that I wanted to highlight as the basis for. I forgot Tony Sharkey was in the audience today. Tony Sharkey is wearing an Adidas track top. He is also from Middlesbrough as well. So this is a Middlesbrough takedown of the webinar here. There are at least two of us from Middlesbrough on online today. So thanks, Tony, for posting that in the chat forum. The first kind of time period, I'm going to start generally, is the 1980s. And one of the things that we haven't really heard from many people at all over the last 3 or 4 weeks, or for the last 3 or 4 years for that matter, and maybe even longer, is football in the 1970s and 80s, which, if I'm brutally honest about it, wasn't always particularly pleasant. It was quite violent sometimes. Hooliganism was a real issue. We think about financial issues now. There were financial issues back then. It's just we tended to talk less about them perhaps than we do now. But nevertheless, football as an experience, dare I say, a product, was considerably different to how it is now. And I think in terms of framing a debate about football as it is today, the Super League, where it goes from here, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that what we absolutely don't want to do is to go back to the 1970s and 80s, because, as I say, it wasn't particularly pleasant. But there was something in the period 1990-1992, I think, is especially significant. In 1990-91, the blueprint for the future of football was published. If you're unfamiliar with this document, it's what ultimately led to the creation of the Premier League. For those of you who don't know why the Premier League was established, various things. One of the things was to ensure that the England national team got better. And it's a moot point whether or not that's happened. But alongside that, there was an identified need to realize the commercial potential of English football. So, in essence, one of the reasons the Premier League was set up was to make money. But keep in mind that the year the Premier League 1992 launched, so did the UEFA Champions League. Now, prior to that, as you will know, it was the European Cup, but it was rebranded, relaunched. You can remember the theme tune. You can hear it in your head right now. I know you can. The Star Ball, the sponsorship portfolio, and everything it has become. Suffice to say, Middlesbrough's not going to get anywhere near the Champions League anytime soon. And so from the Northeast, and for that matter, from Coventry, where I am today, this looks like a Super League already to me, even though it's called the Champions League. But I think those two things together, Premier League, Champions League, really significant. But I think what we also began to see in the early 90s, around 1992, was a change in the world. The world became more global. Keep in mind, we're talking about a year or two before the internet first became public. And that obviously has been really, really significant. Also keep in mind that China introduced a big reform program. And so China then, back in 1990, 1991, is very different to how China is now. And so that's important, I think, in terms of global economic shifts. If we fast forward to 2007, 2008, several things happened. Importantly, in 2007, Europe's top clubs first announced, well, not so much announced, more a case of denied and unsuccessfully denied that they were conspiring to create Super League. Run a Google search and you'll see stories about this back in 2007. And this was at the point, some of you may recall the G14. So the G14, which was actually a group of 20 clubs, they were the kind of self-appointed leaders of European football. They were engaged in a spat with UEFA. There are some details to this, but ultimately, the agreement that was reached with UEFA around the Champions League reform program led to the G14 being dismantled, and instead we got the European Clubs Association being created. And some of you will know over the last 3 or 4 weeks, Agnelli, who was the leader of the European Clubs Association, obviously was a leading voice and a prime mover in the creation of the Super League. But also in 2007, 2008, we saw the development of OTT, over the top broadcasting technology. Some of you might have been early Spotify users. Over the top broadcasting technology, a great example right now is Netflix. And so keep in mind that period, 2007, 2008, we were really starting to see OTT become significant, and I'll come back to that in a moment. We also had the economic crisis, and the economic crisis, the ramifications of that, I think, are still enduring in football even now, and the way in which, for instance, sponsorship deals are signed and managed have been influenced and continue to be influenced by the downturn. But I think crucially, a lot of European economies haven't really recovered fully ever from the crash in 2008, whereas in other parts of the world, and I'm thinking particularly in East Asia, in India, in Malaysia, in China, in South Korea, they have. And what this has instigated is an economic shift. And if you look at the current top 10 or top 20 fastest growing economies in the world, none of them are in Europe. They're in Africa. They're in Asia, particularly in East Asia. So there is some further context there, particularly when we begin to think about global fans. European football is a mature market, and you don't get, in business school terms, you don't get brand switching. I'm not suddenly going to become, sorry Vinny, I'm not suddenly going to become a Wolves fan. I'm just not, because that's not programmed into me. But in other parts of the world where there's significant economic growth, people have rising disposable incomes, where their fan associations and affiliations are not quite as well established as in Europe, there is considerable commercial potential there. The other thing that I would point out about 2008 is 2008 was the year in which the Abu Dhabi government bought Manchester City and eventually turned it into City Football Group, and that whole franchise model, which in itself I think is worthy of probably a webinar on its own. So then fast forward to 2020. Obviously we had the pandemic. In financial terms, for many football clubs that was damaging, but I think for the bigger and more bullish clubs, it was an opportunity to invest, and I think similarly for private equity investors to invest. We all gorged ourselves on Netflix, OTT, and this is really important. I think OTT is really important because looking ahead, those bigger clubs are really looking towards this type of digital technology as the basis for driving new revenue streams. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this example, during March, the NFL in the United States signed a $110 billion TV deal for 10 years. $110 billion. Now, let's be honest about it. Who in the world watches American football apart from Americans? So if the NFL can sell their rights for $110 billion, what could the top 20 European football clubs sell their TV rights for over the next 20 years? And this is why you can see, I think, some of the clamour around the Super League and the ambition and bullishness amongst those big clubs. But I think what we also saw last year is the increasingly globalized nature of football, and there's one particular case that I'll raise, and that's Saudi Arabia's proposed acquisition of Newcastle United. Again, that's a webinar in itself, but crucially, it appears that the British government lobbied the Premier League on behalf of the Saudi Arabian government to sanction the takeover. Boris Johnson and the British government and football. There's another webinar, Chris. We'll have a next Netflix box series of all of this. That's probably the best thing. But the reason that I point this out is that whilst many of us now are in the position where we are complaining about the influence of foreign owners on European football, is neither our government nor the European Union has ever done anything to stop this. I remember the people used to criticize Margaret Thatcher's privatization program and talked about Thatcher selling off the family silver. Well, it's essentially, that's what European football has been doing over the last 20, 25 years. We've been selling off the family silver. And so to suddenly be surprised that US private equity investors want to make a profit by owning football clubs is kind of not surprising at all, because that's what they're in the business of doing. But we as a country and we as a continent have done nothing to stop that. And so what you now have is you have Russians and you have Saudi Arabians and Qataris and others invested into football, and their goals may not be the same as our goals. And that's a really crucial thing to point out. So I think there's been something about the geopoliticization of football, the digitalization of football, the globalization of football. The final one, and I'll say this very quickly, is lifestyle change. Because when I was a kid, life began and ended with the football club opposite my house. You come home from school, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, kick off at 4:30. You probably finish like 8:30. Final score 38-37 or something like that. And so that's how life was. But people's lives have changed. I think the way that they consume has changed. Their expectations about, for instance, service have changed. And so in amongst all of these, if you like, these giga and mega changes, we're also seeing some fairly profound changes too, not just in Britain but elsewhere in the world. We want to use our mobile device to watch football. We want football on demand. When we go to a stadium, we want to be treated well. If I think about the standard of the toilets at Ayresome Park back in the 1970s, that's very different to how you would expect facilities to be in a stadium now. So I guess I'm concluding by saying what's happening now in football is not just something that has been inflicted upon us by others. I think we as fans, we as consumers, and we as citizens have been part of the changes. And we're now obviously at a point where if we're unhappy with what we've got, then we've got to start making some fairly quick and some actually quite difficult decisions. Great.
So it gives me great pleasure today. We're thrilled to have Gary Newbon, MBE, and Ashley Brown with us today. Gary's been a broadcaster for over 53 years, 36 years with ITV and 14 years with Sky Sports. Gary's covered 7 World Cup football finals, 3 Olympic Games, European Championship football, both national and club, many World Boxing Championships from around the world, and a host of other sports ranging from speedway to greyhound racing. He's presented over 10,000 television programmes and was awarded an MBE by Prince Charles at Buckingham Palace in 2019 New Year's Honours List for services to media, sport and charity. His citation stated his development of women in TV sport. And we're delighted to welcome Ashley Brown. Ashley currently works as Head of Governance and Club Liaison at the Football Supporters Association. As part of this role, he leads on the major policy reform work that the Football Supporters Association carries out. And as such, we'll be working closely on the upcoming government fan-led review of football. Ashley is a Pompey fan. He's a board member of the Pompey Trust and was chair of the trust when it battled to save and successfully took control of Portsmouth FC. He subsequently became a director of the club up until its sale in 2017. And a huge thank you, Ashley, for joining us as well. We're going to start with you, Gary. So over to you. Look forward to hearing your thoughts.
In case you're worried about the trophies behind me, they're actually, as you can see, most of them claret, and they're usually full of red wine. So it wasn't for service; it's for services to drinking red wine, probably. But I was delighted to get that MBE. But the most important thing really has been my career and the fact that I'm still working at the grand old age at 76. As I'm on the back nine of life, I tend to look forward rather than back. I would take one or two issues with Simon there. I mean, first of all, I was an executive for quite a long time as well, 22 years, controller of sport in Central. I was deputy head of ITV Sport for a short period. And I also sat on all the committees, and so I dealt with rights. One or two issues I would take with Simon was, first of all, NFL is not my favourite game. But please don't underestimate the appeal of that. Every time they stage it here, and they deliberately bring it here, which the Premier League should take at least one match abroad with 200, in my view, with 200 countries taking the game live. They bring it here to expand the interest in National Football League. And I think our game, Richard Scudamore tried it, could learn a lot from that. The two games that will now be at Spurs will be completely sold out. You can't get a ticket. Wembley was sold out. The bookmakers make a lot of money out of gambling on the NFL, and the Racing Post devote about 6 pages during the season for doing with that. So you can't underestimate other sports at times. Football is the big one, the big killer, as far as everything is concerned. It is huge. Simon referred to the European Champions League. Actually, it was a very slow burn. I was on the committee when we lost the Premier League, the new Premier League. Stupidly, we lost it. I do blame a great friend of mine, Greg Dyke, who was chairman of ITV Sport. Trevor East and myself, who were on the panel, were pleading with him to let us just concentrate on live Sunday afternoon Premier League. Rick Parry, who was in charge of the negotiations for the Premier League, revealed to Greg that he wanted us to do Sunday afternoon live. The new fledgling Sky that had only just started, and I didn't think it would work. I got that wrong, didn't I? I worked for them 14 years as a presenter. I didn't think it would work, but it did. He wanted them to have it on Monday night. Very few people would have been watching it. A match of the day, as it's always been, on a Saturday, well, most of the time. Greg wouldn't go with it. He said, let's blast Sky out of the water. We lost by 1 vote. So Greg took his ball home. And I wanted to do the EFL, as it is, because I had 8 teams in what is now the Championship in the Midlands. And I wanted to spend a lot of my local money for record fees, 30,000 for the home team, 10 away. Doesn't sound very much in 1994, whenever it was, 92. But it was a lot of money regionally in those days. Could I get the 8 clubs to agree? They had no way for showing their advertising, no television coverage. And the only way I could do it was if Oxford played Birmingham, or Birmingham played Leicester, or Wolves played Coventry. It had to be an all Midlands match. Could I get the 8 clubs to agree? And that is a major problem with football. All the clubs have vested interests. I'll come back to that in just a moment. It was a nightmare. I eventually got the deal through. And the point about me saying that was, meanwhile, Greg wouldn't touch the EFL for a long while. So we're now left with, what do we do show for football apart from the ones where terrestrial television always gets, the European Champions League and the World Cups? Well, the answer to Bob Burrows was this competition that nobody was taking any notice of and nobody wanted to buy in this country, which was the European Champions League. And he dealt with Team, who were doing it in those days, an organisation based in Switzerland, and we bought the European Champions League. Then we had a problem with it, because there was only one English team in it at the time, the champions. And when they got knocked out, I remember Carlton Television, who I was working for at the time, the vice chairman called me to London and said, why have we got to show the semi-final of the European Champions League? There isn't an English club in it and we won't get any ratings. And I said, because we're contracted to do it. And he said, well, it's a stupid contract. And I said, well, throw my hands up. My own people arguing amongst themselves. So we put pressure, and I think the Germans did, on getting more than one team in the European Champions League. So that just shows you the difficulties that television has as well. And the other issue I'd take is about, it's quite interesting about the 6. It was terrible what the 6 tried to do. We're all agreed on that. And it was fan power, all sorts of powers, government. Boris played a part, everybody played a part in stopping it. Why did it happen? Well, the Americans, who don't come here very often, they have a completely different culture. And I've got a theory about the difference between England and America. I mean, Britain and America, George Bernard Shaw or Winston Churchill, I can't remember, it was one of those two, said that the two great nations divided by a common language because they use different phrases. Actually, the only thing that at times we have in common with the Americans is the language. We have more in common with the Italian, the French, and the Spanish, but most of us are so lazy. We don't learn their languages. And because of America, the whole world seems to speak English now. But I mean, if you look at the difference between the American owners of British clubs, apart from Aston Villa, they've all got investments in America where their teams have no promotion or relegation. Their teams have no transfers. They have drafts with the best team getting the last pick. They don't have, they have a pay cap. They don't have away fans very often because of the huge distances, completely foreign to everything we stand for here. And the one thing I will say about that is I noticed that all the clubs, the other big clubs who weren't invited, a lot of them condemned it. I'll tell you something, I can't prove this, but I honestly believe if they'd become the seventh club involved in it with all that money, they would have joined it. I think there was quite a lot of anger that they weren't involved as well, even though, for very good reasons, they were against it. So those are some of the issues. So looking forward, because I try and do that all the while, I think the Premier League are absolutely right to do the next deal now, get it done, and hopefully more money coming down to the lower leagues. As far as players' wages are concerned, Simon talked about average players. You're not an average player if you play in the Premier League. These managers have got their jobs on the line. Clubs have got so much at stake. I think that's wrong to call them average players earning a lot of money. Tom Cruise gets 10 million, Daniel Craig even more for making a movie. Why? Because it sells around the world. It's box office. Premier League footballers and clubs are box office. 200 countries around the world taking it. They are film stars. I remember being, one of my lads is an actor I went to see with my wife, went to Thailand to see him. He was making a movie out there. And I called in to see Alex Ferguson at the Manchester United were playing a friendly out there. I had 22 years working with Alex. And I went to the team hotel. There were 8,000 Thais who'd slept outside all night just to get a glimpse. This game is colossal. And the actors in it, the players, should be earning that sort of money. How they deal with the money is and behaviour is another thing. I will defend their behaviour in some ways. I don't condone it, but when I was really reporting the game, there was about 12 trusted journalists following it. No mobile phones, they didn't exist in those days, and we would. I'll give you an instance. Brian Clough, we're with Nottingham Forest in Europe. Cloughie gives me a great interview for ITV, the radio, and the 8 or 10 trusted journalists who were there. This was well before 1990 when the newsboys started getting involved. Cloughie was saying, right, put your camera away, Newbon. Right, put your microphone away. You've got your stories. We're now going out to play. And we go to a nightclub and have drinks and have a good night. You can't do that now. The social media is everywhere. I remember Alex Ferguson saying to me, when I give a press conference, there's 100 people in there for European matches. I don't know who they are. I don't know what their agenda is. I don't want Manchester United in the papers because they won't say anything nice about us. And so the world has changed. And those footballers have always been lads. They've always been chasing around. It's just that now they have to be more responsible because social media is everywhere. Whether it's Jack Grealish going out for a drink during lockdown or it's Maddison partying, they get caught. They've always done things wrong. They're young lads. I don't condone it. But that is the social media we're working in. So what about foreign owners? Well, there aren't many good ones in my book. Aston Villa have got a good one. Wolves have had a good one who backed the team, taken them really up, got the right manager and everything. And Leicester City is magnificent. Now, I've got to be honest, that is my team. I didn't ask for a cup final ticket because they're only 6,500, which in itself was scandalous. The national health workers have done a fantastic job, but they've had their rewards for England matches and the League Cup final. They should have given the fans, in my opinion, for the FA Cup final, a few more tickets. But Leicester is such a class act. I can't think of another big club where the owners are loved by the club staff, the club players, the playing staff, the fans. They all love the owner. And Schmeichel went into the stand after the cup final and pulled him out. Aston Villa have got very good owners, and Villa will be on the march eventually. and Wolves have turned it around a bit. But most of the owners, it is about money. And it's no good saying we've got to stop them. This country has sold its silver to overseas, the Chinese, the Russians, houses, the lot. So we're living in that sort of world, and I don't really know what the answer is to that. As far as crowds are concerned and prices, that's an interesting one. I think that if you go to a football match, you're going to have to pay that sort of money to see the top singing artists pay, and theatre tickets and boxing. It's a difficult one, the price of tickets. Going through these things quickly, and then I'll let somebody else speak. As far as sponsorship is concerned, I am dead against gambling. You are not allowed to advertise junk food soon. You certainly can't advertise cigarettes or beer. Why should football have the exception on gambling? Gambling is a major problem in this country. They are ruining people's lives. It's causing terrible things. And what I don't like about bookmakers, and I'm quite happy to tell them to their face, is that if you win with a bookmaker, they close on you. They only want mud punters. Now, I'm not saying that gambling should be illegal or bookmakers should be illegal, but if you do the things with junk food, with breweries, that sort of thing, I don't think there should be gambling on shirts. I'm sorry, and it's going to hurt football. Why should football have an exception? Because I do think eventually that they've halted. They were going to do something about it, the government, but they've actually halted that for the time being. So that's my view on that. As far as fan ownership is concerned, I find that really puzzling. I know Michael Eisner now owns Portsmouth. Somebody wanted to buy Portsmouth. I made a phone call to the club, passing a message on, and Michael Eisner is not going to sell that to anyone. He cares about the club, and he cares about it. And although he doesn't go there very often, he does care about it. And I think he's a very good owner. That's my view. As far as fans are concerned, I mean, I shop at Waitrose. I think it's a great store, and I spend quite a lot of money there. I don't expect to have a say in how they run it. Fans pay their money to go to the football match. That doesn't, in my view, entitle them to be involved with the running of a club. I'm sorry. They don't have any financial responsibilities. They don't put their mortgage on the line. They don't put their house on the line. They are there as customers. And I don't expect to tell Waitrose how to run their business. If I'm unhappy with something, I'm quite entitled to put a complaint in. Football fans are quite entitled to make a claim about something they don't like. That is a lot difference. And the other thing I find extraordinary with football fans, I understand the passion, I understand all that, but they demand the sacking of a manager. But supposing they worked in an office, how would they feel if 10,000 people stood outside their office demanding their removal from that office? You know, I think the management thing has to be looked at. I think the governance of football, I think Richard Masters is very good. I think they duck away from the issues, the business about pay caps. The League 1 and 2, they've got to have league caps. I'm sorry about the teams at the top like Sunderland and that. They may have a big budget, but these clubs need protecting from themselves, because one of the problems with money is that if you give a club £5, they'll spend it. If you give them 5,000, they'll spend it. 5 million, 5 billion on the same sort of money. And agents, I'm glad that people like De Bruyne and that are now leaving the agents. I don't have a problem agents representing footballers. I do have a problem with them representing clubs and the player and taking it both ways. In show business, you represent the art. I've never had an agent, but until recently, but in show business, you don't pay both of them. I remember, I'll spare his blushes, but I was sitting with Brian Barwick when he was head of ITV Sport, and a well-known agent came in representing a presenter. I didn't really want to take her on, but I took her on for a short period to help Brian out. I put her in the Midlands. We did him a favour. We took the girl on. She wasn't bad, but she wasn't good enough to really make. I've never heard of her since. He wanted us to pay him as well. And we said, hang on a bit, mate. We're not a football club. We're trying to do you a favour. You take it off the artist. So football does have a problem. It has a problem with, the Derby County situation is very interesting. You know, they get around the rules, and football doesn't seem at times to be able to cope with it. The other interesting thing is that, you know, BT are trying to sell their sport. People want the rights that they've got to the Premier League, but do they want all the rights they've got to the Premier League? There may be one or two sports that suffer as a result, and that they may have to address it. So all in all, it's the greatest game in the world. I don't think politicians are really going to bring much to the table. They debate it all. They're more interested in votes and being seen to say the right things. I think football has to sort its own problems internally, but it's a great game. It's still in demand. The Premier League will always have customers trying to buy their rights. But I do think that the governance of the game needs a little bit more care and a few braver decisions. So there we are, Chris. I've sort of given you an overall. As you know, I'm a quiet, shy, retiring Violet. And I hope that's given... I'm sure not everybody will agree with me, and that's what debate is about. Absolutely. But I've got a long experience of the game, and it's a wonderful game. By and large, I would say 80% of it is absolutely fine, but there's 20% of it that does need addressing.
Gary, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. And now over to you, Ashley. There's one for you to follow there. Thanks ever so much.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Hello, everybody. First of all, picking up on Simon's theme, I'm not from Middlesbrough, but my dad and uncle are, and are both Middlesbrough fans. But I was brought up in Portsmouth with my mother being a huge Pompey fan, and I took that line of support and have been a Pompey fan ever since. And as Chris mentioned in his introduction, I was heavily involved when the Portsmouth fans saved Portsmouth Football Club. Portsmouth Football Club is their absolute pin-up for badly run football clubs historically. We had owners who perhaps didn't exist, owners who had their assets frozen due to gun running in Africa. Other ones had their assets frozen and extradition orders due to multi-hundred-million-dollar bank frauds in their own countries. 2 administrations in as many years. Another owner who put £5 million into the club, which it turns out he stole from his wife. So there's a few problems that football encountered around regulating a club. But the supporters actually stepped in, and not only did they raise the money, raise about £6 million to bring it out of administration and save it, fought a high court battle and won it, and then completely turned the club around. So much so, in fact, that we, as Gary mentioned, attracted the interest of Michael Eisner, who is a good owner and is somebody that has absolutely the right intentions of how to run a football club, which is sustainably, but also understanding the community that it's based in and building a relationship and bond with its fans. I think, talking about the problems of football from a supporter perspective, really, most of the time, football fans, the things they moan about is, yes, they moan about the managers, as Gary said, they moan about what's happening on the pitch, and then they moan about things like ticket prices, they moan about safe standing. Those are the things that generally get supporters activated. But a few things happened in the last year or so that have brought more supporters along the lines of looking at the issues with the game's governance. So people like me who've worked in this area for a number of years are finding more and more supporters are interested in that side of the game. And I look at some of those triggers in the last year. Last year we had the announcement around Project Big Picture, which, on first read, a lot of people thought were really positive. But actually you get down into the bones of it, and it was a clear money and power grab by a few clubs in the Premier League. More recently, the European SuperLeague, again, money and power grab by a few top clubs, not just in this country, but across Europe. And clearly, with that one in particular, the fans played a huge part in getting that very, very quickly cast aside, and clubs in this country, at least, having to quickly turn around, apologise, and in fact, in a number of instances now make very positive announcements about how they want to improve their engagement with supporters right the way up to board level. You then look at some of the problems with clubs. We had Bury and Macclesfield sadly both disappear. We have Bolton and Wigan going into administration, and I could list a whole host of problems around non-league as well. You've got clubs like Basingstoke that have struggled with an owner that's been trying to build flats on their ground for a few years now. So these are some of the triggers which got people interested. And then, of course, the one big thing that's affected all of us in the last year or so is COVID. And I think what COVID has done to football is it's really brought to light the importance of supporters, not just from a financial perspective, but also just seeing those grounds full. I mean, we've been lucky enough in the last couple of nights to see supporters steadily return. We've had some test games with the cup finals, and it's starting to make a difference already, and people long to have full stadiums again, and hopefully we'll be there in August. So challenges of the game, what challenges to supporters, or do we think that the game has around governance? We have to look at the regulators. We have to look at what the FA, the Football League, the Premier League, and the other governing bodies do in this country. In reality, several years ago, the Football Association pretty much abdicated a chunk of responsibility in the professional game of this country. Continues to look at on-field discipline, but it really isn't bothered about what else happens with the professional game. It really wants to focus on its national teams and everything in grassroots and non-league football. The Premier League, they're of course the big boys. You know, they consider themselves as the real influencers of the game, and of course they're a multi-billion-dollar industry. So why shouldn't they? And then you have the Football League that sort of follow along behind the Premier League, trying to pick up the scraps of the table, and of course grassroots are left with the scraps of the scraps. And that brings us to financial solidarity. Yes, of course, those clubs at the top, those clubs with those multi-million-pound superstars, they're always going to be the ones that deserve to get more of the commercial revenues from TV. It is them that generates it. But we've got a huge disparity now with how that money is spread around the game. We still have some of the worst grassroots facilities across Western Europe. Anybody who's a parent of a child that plays football will know that throughout the winter, oh, it's raining, game's probably going to be cancelled because the pitch isn't up to it. We all go weeks and weeks without kids being able to play, and yet we are the richest country across the whole world when it comes to football revenues, and we can't support our grassroots. We also have to look at the big disparity and the problems it causes in professional football. If we look at, I think, the financial year end in 2019, and we look at parachute payments, 8 clubs were in receipt of parachute payments. Those payments were 2.6 times more than the entire 64 other football leagues clubs got between them. So 8 clubs getting a ridiculous amount more money. And that started to create, and it's just got worse and worse, the complete basket case that the Championship is. So in the Championship, we have clubs trying to gamble for that prize of the Premier League and that huge reward that you get from the Premier League. We have some owners in there that are willing to gamble huge amounts to do it, sometimes their own money, sometimes the bank's money, sometimes the football club's mortgage stadium's money. And also you get those parachute clubs that come in that are able to compete at a completely different level. So what we need to do is look at the financial control as well. That's another huge challenge. So we've got these ridiculous debts that are built up across football. We have clubs continuing, despite the huge amount of money coming into the game, making huge losses. We have assets that get lost. Football grounds are sold off, not just the high-profile ones that happen at places like Derby and Sheffield Wednesday, right the way across the football league, the non-league system now, it's happening, where we have Singaporean property developers buying into non-league clubs and then renting them back to them at perhaps extortionate prices and perhaps with a speculation to build on it over time. We have to protect those grounds all the way across the country. We also have to address the elephant in the room, which is the player wages. I don't disagree with Gary that a number of these top footballers are the superstars. They are the actors in the A-list actors from the Hollywood movies. So absolutely, they deserve to get their just rewards. But what we can't do is pay people more than we can afford. What any business wouldn't do that. Your top Hollywood producer wouldn't pay your A-list actor unless they really thought they were going to get that money back at the box office. And yet what we do in this country, even in the Premier League, we pay more than we can afford. That just doesn't seem right to me. And just a few other financial stats, again from 2019 financial account season. Despite the huge money coming to the game, 9 Premier League clubs still made a loss. Net debt in the Premier League was in excess of £3 billion. In the Championship, only 2 clubs made a profit. Combined losses in the Championship that year were 382 million. 8 Championship clubs had a net debt of in excess of 50 million. 4 of those had a debt in excess of 100 million. Total club debt in the Championship totaled in excess of 1.1 billion. So yet it might be a rich game, but we cannot continue to allow it to govern in that way. And if we look at that from a Midlands perspective, you've got Birmingham City now, famous old club, 100 million in excess of debt. Coventry in recent years spent a number of seasons playing away from its hometown because of a ridiculous dispute around the council and the Ricoh Arena. Derby, huge amounts of debt, various weird and wonderful owners talking about potentially buying into Derby. So it's happening everywhere. And we really need to sort of think about owners as custodians. Yeah, of course, there's some brilliant owners. We've talked about some today. You know, the guys at Leicester, Villa, other places around the country. There's some owners, both domestic and foreign, doing brilliant things with their football clubs. But there's still plenty of bad ones. And plenty of them that are not risking their own money. They're actually ending up risking the survival of the club. That's what they're gambling. They're not gambling their own money. They're mortgaging their club, gambling the survival of their club on that promotion. And we have to put a stop to that because these clubs are hugely important to their communities. They're real heritage items for us in this country. And we have to consider owners as custodians. I think it's important that we keep the game real. It's been mentioned by both Simon and Gary how huge football in this country has become globally. And yeah, we have to acknowledge that it's changing, but also we have to remember that it's essentially a live game. We need to keep it real. We need to keep the stadiums full. We need to keep live fans interested and at the centre of everything that's happening. Football is more than a business. To many people, many millions of people around the country and around the world, it's about everything they do through the week. They work from Monday to Friday to get to the game on a Saturday. They want to meet their friends in the pub and talk about the game before. They want to moan about it afterwards. It's about the communities that those football clubs are in. It's about the heritage and history of those clubs. It's about allegiances with fans of the same team and also the hatred, albeit mostly in a fun way, of the team down the road or the local derby when it's played. And it's about the memories and the times that you spend with friends. It's not just the business. It's so much more to many, many people. And I think we also have to worry about the loss of young fans. Ticket prices are an issue. We do, in particular, it's an issue with the youth. What we're starting to see in this country is a loss of fans between the sort of age of 16 to 25. Clubs are very, very good on child ticketing, and you know most parents can afford to take a child along to football because they do some very good rates. But come 16 or 18 or whatever the age limit is that the club sets, prices tend to jump significantly. Parents can't always afford that, and the youngsters are perhaps still students or apprentices or something, and they can't afford it either. And plus, there's the other temptations. You know, you can go in the pub with 20 quid and watch the game on the TV with your friends and have a few beers. We do worry about the loss of those young people. So some of the solutions, well, we haven't got too long left, so I can't go into too much detail, but the FSA does a huge amount of work in this area, and we'll be giving a huge amount of evidence and submissions to the government review that's starting to take place now. Football, yes, it's progressed hugely in recent decades. Football's done a lot of good work to improve itself, but recent things show that it still cannot do it on its own. It cannot regulate itself. We believe, we would of course, because we're the Supporters Association, but we believe fans should be central to discussions at every level of football, both locally and nationally. They're a hugely important part of the game, and they care about the game. They care about their clubs, and they do want to see the game move in the right direction. They do want to see their clubs succeed. We believe independent regulation is required. What do I mean by independent? I mean independent of club owners. That's where, to us, a lot of the problems happen with the Football League and the Premier League. They govern themselves. Sometimes it needs somebody else to step in and oversee that. That regulator needs to make sure that we've got some tougher regulation around finance, that regulations are clearer. They're not always particularly transparent, despite the rule books being available. Understanding what somebody can be sanctioned for and what they are sanctioned is very unclear. Solidarity, I've talked about that. We believe parachute payments should be abolished, and if you're going to abolish parachute payments, you have to make sure you address wages. People should only be able to pay what they can afford, and players should only be paid at the level that they are playing at. So a Premier League player gets relegated, they're earning 70 grand a week in the Premier League, and they're going to play in the Championship now. They can't earn 70 grand a week anymore. They're a Championship player. Also, quickly to talk about 50+1, which has hit the headlines a lot. Clearly, that's famous for being a German model. We've done quite a bit of work about what we think 50+1 is in this country. Clearly, we're not going to nationalise all football clubs overnight. We've got football clubs that are worth several billion in this country. But what 50+1 really means, and in fact, the way in which it works in Germany, is it's about the fans having a say in the matters that are important, having some control and veto over heritage rights, having some control and veto over what happens with a football ground, having a say both at the operational and also the strategic level of a football club, perhaps supporter directors, perhaps independent directors, and perhaps even a right to invest in those football clubs. It's about creating the opportunities for the supporters to get involved, and many clubs are really, really good at doing this already. It's not all negative. There's some fantastic examples of the way that football clubs engage and work with the supporters, and how both the fan base and the club have benefited from it. So there's lots of good examples out there. We need to continue building on those, but most importantly, we do need some form of independent regulation to oversee the way that football moves forward in this country. Thank you, Chris.
Ashley, a huge thank you for your thoughts. That really is much appreciated. Thank you ever so much. And now we move on to our second session, which is over to the clubs now. So we're delighted to be joined by Anne-Marie Eden, who's the CEO of Solihull Moors, and Vinny Clark, who's General Manager of Commercial Operations at Wolverhampton Wanderers Football Club. Just by way of brief introductions, Anne-Marie joined Solihull Moors from club sponsor, the highly regarded and fast-growing financial services firm Gerond, where she was Head of Client Experience, working closely alongside the partners and directors. Anne-Marie enjoyed a 30-year career in professional services across the Midlands and is well known for her entrepreneurial and people-focused approach, which is now for the benefit of Moors. She's also active in the community, volunteering for various charities, particularly working for Birmingham Christmas Shelter homeless charity for the past 13 years. So, Anne-Marie, obviously, I had the privilege of going to Solihull Moors yesterday. Over to you, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of an insight into the club and some of the biggest challenges, and then we'll move on to you, Vinny, as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. It is a shame that you came last night, really, and didn't get to see what you wanted to see, but I'm working out that we can't control everything here. We can do what we can, but that's one of the things that we can't control. But thank you for asking me to be here. And just for the purposes of everybody else, I did say thank you very much for asking me, but are you sure you want me on the panel? Because in my introduction, like you've heard, I joined Solihull Moors as CEO in April last year in lockdown, having never worked in the football industry or really been to many matches before. So everything I've learned in the last year, all I know about football really is in COVID restrictions with no fans. So I think from now onwards, I've probably got quite a new role to adapt to. But the purpose of really me answering your questions about the impact of COVID, if we start with that one, I think financial obviously is the answer that every football club will say. It's been a massive financial strain for many reasons, because we've had to continue playing, but we've got nothing coming in but a lot going out. That's it in basic terms, but it's how we adapt to it. The fact that I'm not a football person is why Darryl Eales, who's the chairman, asked me to come from a sponsor, because he'd seen me in the boardroom hosting tables at every home game. He asked me to come because of my people background, client experience, people, but also my not being involved in football. So I wouldn't have really had lots of years of having my head turned by the football side of things. And I do think that's quite a good reason for me to be here. But from a Solihull Moors point of view, putting the financial problems aside, fan engagement, I think, has been something that we've had to work on quite hard over this last year, of keeping fans engaged in any way possible by doing live streaming, which has worked really well for us and probably many other clubs. Our social media presence is probably heightened because fans are very important to us. But I think we've got to carry that on in a different way than we've ever done before. It's not all going to finish, come August and we start the new season again. Not everything to do with COVID and all these restrictions will have gone away. I think we've got to think quite far ahead. We'll still need more stewards. We'll still need the fogging, cleaning. We've got to make them feel comfortable about coming back into a new way of watching football. And so that's something that's quite in my head. I don't want us to think, great, it's all back to normal, all come back, because it won't work like that. I personally, actually, looking at the way we've done the live streaming and the figures that we've got, on some matches, I think we've gained more fans by having it live streamed. If we're comparing it to gate numbers, on some games we've more than doubled the normal attendance. I know those will be some away fans, but I think we have actually gained something extra. One of the things I do listen to all our shareholders and directors and sponsors who've been around, and Darryl, one of the things that he said to me is, we're more than just a football club, we're more than just football here, but it's making people out there aware of the other things that we do. He wants us to be a football club in the community, the community football club, football with purpose, I think is the word that he's using. And that's actually music to my ears, because I can't control, how players play on the pitch, but I can try and get involved in pulling more people to us, because we're a neutral club in the area. In the Midlands, when I look at our board, we've got shareholders who are fans from West Bromwich Albion, Leeds, Villa, Blues, but that really doesn't matter. Their second team is Solihull Moors, and the aim of us here is actually, you can keep your first teams, that will never change, because one of the shareholders said to me, and in fact he said it last night at the match, in your life you can change your house, your car, your job, your spouse, but one thing you'll never change is your football team. and we're not going to try and change that. What we want to do out there is make Solihull Moors in this area your second club, but the one where you spend the most time because you feel welcome, you enjoy what you get when you're here. And that's perhaps what I'm going to focus on when we are allowed more people back in hospitality, as well as in the ground, but also businesses becoming engaged with us, events happening, using our ground. You know, it's empty most of the week. People can adapt and use as office space. We've got all sorts of ideas. So where the question to me isn't going to be the same as other clubs. When you say, how do you see what we're going to be doing and our biggest challenges, it's going to be talking about and looking at all the other things apart from football, no, in addition to football, not apart from football, that we can make this club something for everybody. One of the things that I heard yesterday, one of the coaches passed me as I was walking in, and I said, "Oh, I bet all the players are really excited. You know, we're getting the fans in." And he said, "I'm a little bit worried." And I was like, "Well, why?" He said, "Because we had to unlearn how to play with fans. They had to adapt to quiet in the stadium, not the roar of people cheering them on, which actually does make you play better, apparently." And they said to me last night, we've got to relearn how to play again with crowds being there, because we can hear what each other are saying more now. We can talk to the player. The coach said he can talk to the players easier, but now that's going to they're going to have to re-look at how they play. That's my view. I do have to say these are my views and not the position that, you know, if Daryl were on the call, it would be completely different, and shareholders and directors. This is me speaking, so not the view of the club. But so the challenges for us are keeping the fan engagement, obviously trying to think of how we can gain more revenue to you know, carry on, and we want to be more in the community, and those are the things that we can do, or I can help with anyway. Like I said, I didn't come from a football background. When I was one of the main sponsors at Jerem's, and I did come here every home game, entertaining business clients and business contacts, and it worked well. And I actually gradually, over probably the first few games, I was like, actually, this is not bad. I actually quite like football. I could see what was happening and I understood it, but it was more than that. And I think, Ashley, you said something about it's everything. People talk about it before they get there. They talk about it when they're there. They'll be thinking about it later in the week in the pub. And actually, I felt that with the clients and everybody that was in the hospitality side of things. They were planning when they were going to be coming again, talking to other business owners. We were a hub, really, of a lot of other things happening. And we shouldn't, or I shouldn't underestimate the power of that. I've got a 14-year-old son who's been playing football since he was little. It's all he talks about. And it's where the passion in his eyes comes out. And I didn't really understand it until this last year, but I've seen it firsthand at home now with him. And I see it and I hear it with everybody involved at the club, where it be the fans outside or the people who want to spend their time mixing with other like-minded people. And to me, yeah, maybe 1-2 years ago, I was like, it's just football. It's so much not. And I felt it and I see it. And I absolutely love the fact that I am involved in Solihull Moors, and hopefully what we see for the, you know, what's coming out at the other side, at the other end, it's going to be brilliant and it's going to be massive. And I might be looking at this through rose tinted glasses, but I'm fine with that. So for me, that's my view, and I hope that, I don't know if it fits in with everybody else, but that's me.
Thank you ever so much, Anne-Marie. Thank you.
So
And now we're on to Vinny. Vinny, again, thank you ever so much for joining us today. Having made the move from his role as head of motorsport at Fanatics to join Wolves as head of retail in May 2019, Vinny Clark is now part of the club's leadership team as general manager of commercial operations. Vinny has a depth of experience, having worked alongside some of the biggest teams and stars in world sport, and has taken his knowledge to Molineux to help improve the commercial offering across the club. So over to you, Vinny. Look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Oh. Bear with me, Vinny. Hang on, Vinny, won't be a sec. Just need to unmute there. There we go. Me? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris, and thanks for having me along. It's been great to hear everybody's views so far. From a Wolves perspective, I think there's probably three things that I wanted to sort of cover off in this little section. First was the impact of COVID, which Anne-Marie discussed a little bit as well as some of the biggest challenges that the club and the sport face, which guys have spoken about at length so far. And there's a few themes in there that'll follow through to what I'm going to speak about. And then really what's next, not necessarily from a footballing perspective, but from a Wolves perspective. You know, what do we see as being our future strategy for growth, and how are we going to act and go about our business in a way that tries to set us apart from the rest. So they're the three things I'll touch upon. Starting with COVID, I think the impact of COVID on Wolves has been threefold, really. I think first of all, there's a clear and obvious sporting impact that we've had. And don't get me wrong, it's been great that we've been able to play and you know, having live football to enjoy has been one of the few positives for people over the last year. So there's no complaints from my side, but you know, there's no hiding from the fact that it's been a really stressful season and period of time for our footballers. You know, we've had a fantastic injury record for the last 2 years. And now the seasons are all out of sync. There's all sorts of weird and wonderful kickoff times and days, and the season has been crammed into a shorter space of time, and that puts a great deal of strain on the players. You know, recovery time is everything now at the very highest level, and that recovery time is getting littler and fewer by the year. So we have really had a bad injury record this year. We've had a lot of muscular injuries, and undoubtedly that's due to the fatigue. So there's been a clear sporting disadvantage that has come from the COVID impact. The second one is obviously the commercial impact that it's had on the club, and we're not alone in this. And I know that the shockwaves from COVID have been felt commercially right across not just football but sport in general. But from a Premier League perspective, you know, there's been a £330 million broadcast rebate across the Premier League, which has been incredibly painful. And some of that's been deferred, but nonetheless, you know, it is a real number. Added to that, our matchday revenues have pretty much been wiped out. And to give you a little bit of context as to what that means, usually our matchday revenue is around 10% of our total revenues of business. So that's been a massive miss for us. And we don't really know when that's going to end. We're optimistic that obviously we've got fans back for the first time this Sunday, and we're hoping that we can grow that pretty quickly, that capacity into next season. But there's no guarantees at the moment when we'll be back to a full house and our optimal sort of matchday revenues. In addition, we've had some sponsorship issues, so there's been some rebates due to sponsors, and that's purely because we've been unable to fulfil our obligations to those sponsors. So things like matchday sponsors and all that stuff that goes on, we've just not been able to do. So, you know, people have rightly been wanting to have conversations with us about that. And added to all of those sort of revenue dips, we've also had no changes to our fixed costs and our payroll. We've taken a view that we didn't furlough anybody, as a lot of Premier League clubs did. But this was something that was particularly important to Fosun or our ownership group. You know, they felt that furlough was not something they wanted to be involved in, and they actually extended that out to some of our third-party staff as well. So our caterers, which we outsource, we covered the cost for those guys who work at Molineux to keep being paid through the period where they weren't able to work. So combination of missed revenue and no reduction in costs has been really tough for us. And our published reports of 2019-20 show that we did suffer quite a substantial £40 million loss in the financial year. and that's not really improved going into this year. A lot of the situations that meant that we struggled in 1920 at the back end have obviously followed on. So this year isn't looking, brilliantly from a financial perspective either. And the third strand to the impact is around our community, which is, something that's hugely important to us. And I think when you look at the impact, actually, yes, there's been some negatives, but there's been some huge positive impacts that's come out of COVID and how we've sort of interacted and engaged with our community. Obviously, on the negative side, fans haven't been able to attend matches. For a lot of people, that's what they live for. That match day, that going for a pint with the mates or the family and coming to the game at a weekend. That's what gets them through the week, and they've not been able to do that for over a year, and that's been, really difficult for a lot of people, not just at Wolves but around the country. And we've found that fans feel disconnected from the club, probably more than they ever have done. And obviously they can't be with us, they can't come and interact in the normal ways that they usually do. So whilst there's probably nothing, there's no agenda that's meant we're forcibly disconnecting ourselves from our fan base. That's just the feeling that they get, and I'm sure that'll be put right when they come back to the games next year. But for a lot of fans, they've had that disconnected feeling, and that's not been a great feeling for them. On the positive side, we've done tons of work in the community over the last year. We had our Feed Our Pack initiative, which has raised hundreds of thousands of pounds for those in our city that are most in need. Our manager, Nuno Espirito Santo, he personally pledged 250k to that initiative, which was a huge gesture, and that's been a real positive for us to sort of bring to our community, and everybody who's been involved in that deserves huge credit. We've done care calls from our staff and our ex-players to our elderly and vulnerable fans. So we've made sure that we're checking in on our long-standing fan base that may not be okay, maybe alone or maybe suffering. So we've ensured that we've stayed engaged with them that way. Through our ownership group, Folsom, we've donated hundreds of thousands of pieces of PPE equipment to local hospitals, medical centres and care homes, and that's something that's really important from us. Folsom have done that across Europe, but they specifically really wanted to do something, in the Black Country and around Wolverhampton. So that's been another huge positive that's come out of this unfortunate situation. The work our foundation are doing has continued to go from strength to strength in their outreach programme to reach the most and help the most vulnerable in our city is probably, they've been more active than they've probably ever been. So that's that the work that they're doing is another source of pride for us as a club. And away from sort of that community element and sort of about fan engagement and stuff, we've actually found several new ways of engaging with our supporters whilst we've not been able to visit Molyneux. So we now do matchday live content, which is something we've not done before, which enables people to feel probably a little bit closer to the ground than they may have done without that. And we've done virtual mascots, which have been a huge success. We've launched 24/7 radio, so people can always get content from the club and feel as though they're in touch with what we're doing. We've also launched digital and audio matchday programs. Obviously, the walk up and buy a program at the match has not been something that people can do. So we've been working really hard to make sure that we can get that content to people who aren't able to come to the game. So we've done a lot to try and bridge the gap and the disconnect that COVID has brought about. And I think organisationally as well, we've made some really positive strides throughout this tough time. We give, as well as the care calls that we've been giving to fans, we've been doing that to all of our staff now. So everybody who works for the club gets regular, probably weekly care calls from people who are just there to listen and to make sure everybody's okay. And due to the great work our HR team have done, we've now got a much greater focus on well-being, and the club are great at keeping in touch with people and making sure that they're doing okay. So that's COVID. I think in terms of the biggest challenges to the club, as well as to football, I think it's fair to say probably football's not in the greatest state of health right now that it's ever been. We've just talked a lot about COVID, and those impacts are far-reaching. Obviously, the recent European SuperLeague debacle that's been discussed so far on this webinar is it's interesting in terms of how that will play out moving forward, and the potentially the damage that has done, and what will need to be done now to safeguard against things like that in the future. I know fans, the introduction of things like VAR, you mentioned earlier, a lot of fans believe that ruining the enjoyment of the game. So there are lots of factors at the moment that the sport needs to really think about and overcome. But I think in really simple terms, and this has been touched upon by a few of the guys so far, football is a working class game. You know, the fan base around the country and probably around Europe is generally working class, hardworking people who want to enjoy the football, and more it's kind of not operating in a working class environment. When you talk about, you know, the broadcasting and the sponsorship deals that are out there, those types of numbers don't kind of lend themselves to feeling particularly working class. And I think that brings a bit of a fundamental strain between the sport and its consumers, and you know, almost a victim of its own success. The sport, in many ways, it's a hugely popular sport, both domestically and to the sort of 3 billion plus global audience that the Premier League gets worldwide. And because of that, you know, huge reach and the ability to reach many eyeballs and speak to many people, huge investment comes with that. And you know, we've seen that broadcasters, sponsors, and even owners have invested huge amounts into the Premier League because of that reach. For me, the primary issue is that the fuel that's required to deliver that continued sporting success actually outweighs these huge revenues, and I think that's probably been touched upon a little bit as well today. Now, I think if you look at some of the numbers, Premier League clubs collectively have seen revenue hits this year of around £1 billion collectively. Yeah, that's due to COVID, but this isn't just a COVID issue. If you go back a year, in 2018-19, the 20 clubs combined shared a combined loss of 600 million, despite the revenue for the league being above 5 billion. So, and in addition to that, since 2009, there's only been 2 seasons where there's been a combined profit across the 20 clubs. So the main issue the clubs face is, you know, if they don't continue to invest, there's every chance you'll drift, you'll drop divisions, and you have to remain competitive. And to do that, you have to kind of spend at these levels. And it's a really difficult conundrum to overcome. And I will say, it's not just a Premier League issue. You know, someone mentioned earlier the Championship. It's probably the most difficult environment to exist in. You know, the Championship's got so many clubs that are all trying to get out of that division and into the Premier League. You know, we've been in the Premier League for 3 years now, but the year we were promoted from the Championship, it was a hugely successful year for us on field, but we actually lost £50 million on our P&L that season. And that, you know, the issue with that is there are only 3 clubs every year who can achieve that promotion, but there may be 12 to 15 even more clubs who are all overreaching on the gamble that, you know, that they might be one of those 3, and obviously at least 9 of them are going to be disappointed and miss out, and that creates a really, really tough environment. And actually, if you keep going down the pyramid, the same principles are true. You know, you look at Gary Neville's Salford, and Marie will be aware at that level. You know, owners will come in and will spend a ton of money and often quickly progress through 3 or 4 rungs of the ladder. And you know, he's done that with Salford, and they've reached a point now where they're probably stabilising a little bit. But that investment has seen that, you know, back to back promotions, and that is a reality. So the problem's the same, you know, from the Premier League right down through the pyramid. The problem is the same. It's just that the numbers get bigger as, you know, the further up that you go. So, you know, we've talked a little bit about this, and there's a lot of talk about more money going down the pyramid, and you know, whether that's needed. I think that would be a good thing, but I do fear that won't necessarily fix the issue. You know, someone mentioned earlier, if you give someone a £5 or £5,000 or £5 million, they'll still find a way to spend it. And I think the issues that I'm talking about here are scalable. And you know, I don't think throwing more money at it necessarily fix that, because the same culture will still exist. It'll just be bigger numbers that will be involved in the lower league. So for me, with all that weighed up, I think there are probably 2 things that need to happen to address the problems. I think there needs to be a bit of a culture shift towards wanting clubs to be a bit more financially sustainable. You know, fans, Ashley was really interesting to speak to, but there is an expectation, certainly in the Premier League and probably in the Championship, and if not below, that fans just want clubs to go and spend loads of money. They want to buy the best multi-million-pound talent that you can buy every summer. And you know, I want fans to be able to be proud when a club is actually financially run sensibly. You know, there is this willingness to overspend on wages and to overspend on transfers, And fans don't really always question where that money's coming from, and it has to come from somewhere. Daniel Levy is a great example of this. Love him or loathe him, he gets a really, really rough ride from Spurs fans for not overreaching and for not going out and, you know, spending tons of money on players and not kicking the club onto that next level in the fans' eyes. And that mindset can actually be quite damaging, because Daniel's trying to balance everything and make sure that the football club is run well without sort of overreaching and overexpanding. So, you know, you look at, Ashley mentioned a few clubs earlier, you look at the likes of Wigan and Portsmouth and Bolton, you know, that's the end result of what persistent overreaching and careless spending brings. And some really great clubs with tremendous heritage, you know, have found themselves in really choppy waters because of that overreaching. So I think the culture just needs to shift, and you know, rather than this always let's just spend and climb up the divisions, I'd like to see fans a bit more proud that, you know, actually we're not doing that. We're trying to build a sustainable business that, you know, that can survive tricky times like we've seen in the last couple of years. And second to that sort of culture shift, I think the cost of being competitive needs to be addressed. There's been some chat about players' wages earlier on and whether they're justified or not justified, and I probably won't get into that. But if you look at it from a purely economics perspective, personally, I don't see player wages as being payroll in the true sense of the word. I consider them to be assets and the cost of doing business. I think, you know, if you look at the metaphor of us being a factory, I don't think the players are our staff. I think the players, if we're a car manufacturer, the players are our engine. They're the asset that drives us and enables us to trade, and therefore I'd consider them as a cost of sale rather than payroll. And if you look at it in that context, many clubs at all levels, that they regularly have that cost of sales line of 70, 75, even 80% of what their revenue is. And if you go in any other industry, that's just not a sustainable business model. So that's one of the major problems. And for the record, I absolutely don't blame the players. It's not their fault. You know, they get one short career, and if people are willing to pay it, why should they turn it down? And I also don't blame the clubs, because, you know, we've talked about if you don't pay those wages and pay those transfer fees, you do find yourself sort of slipping and sliding down the league. So I don't think it's anybody's fault. I just think that's the situation that we're in now. So I think that culture shift and that sort of cost of doing business are the two major changes I personally believe are needed. How they're achieved, I don't know. You know, they're not easy problems to overcome. But I do know that if they aren't addressed, you know, the cycle will continue. The game will probably become less accessible because things are getting more expensive, tickets, merchandise, things like that, because you're trying to compete in bigger financial terms. And the losses over time will become greater, and you know, scarily, we'll probably lose a few more clubs who've got, you know, hundreds of years of history. So that's my view on the future of the game. In terms of what's next for football, I can tell you what's next for us, you know, and how we're trying to become a different proposition to many other clubs who we consider to be our peers. And one of the main strategies around that is we now see that the worlds of fashion, gaming, sports and entertainment are all colliding now more than ever. And moving forwards, we don't necessarily just see ourselves as being a football club, but as a sports and entertainment brand that appeals to many different demographics, you know, across the globe. It was mentioned earlier, it was Simon mentioned that you're a fan of a club and you'll never ever be a fan of any other football club. And you know what we're trying to do is we're trying to open up new fan bases. So to give you an example, my nephew, he's an 11-year-old nuts Man City fan, and I'm always trying to give him Wolves stuff. Do you want the Wolves shirt? And he's not interested in it whatsoever, which is a shame. But we recently did a really cool collaboration with Fortnite, which is a computer game where you can buy sort of in-game skins and things like that. And we made a sort of collaboration jersey, Fortnite Wolves jersey. And he was on the phone in 10 minutes, you know, what, I need one of them. Can you get me one of them? So it's not about necessarily trying to steal fans from other clubs, but it's about broadening that sort of horizon of the types of demographics that we're speaking to and communicating with, and trying to grow fan bases within different territories at different ages, and by using different tools to do that. The hardcore fan, the hardcore football fan, probably won't want to hear much of that. And, they think, anything like that's a distraction and we should be focusing solely on the football club. But the reality is we have to find a way of being different and, gaining a competitive advantage over, the Leicesters, the Newcastles, the West Hams, the Evertons of this world that we're in and around. When we're out to market for sponsorships and commercial partners, we're usually speaking to the same types of people. So what makes us different? What are we able to sell into them that sets us apart from what some of these other clubs who are solely focused on football can do? And that's a really interesting play for us. Of course, football will always be at the very core of everything we do. But to give you an example of some of the things we've been doing recently, we've entered new arenas. So we're quite heavily into esports at the moment. So we're in the football space. We enter FIFA competitions, but we also play games that aren't football related. So we've got teams in Rocket League amongst other sports, and our esports activity in China, because we're owned by a Chinese company, and we have a team out there who are building out great things in the esports world out in China. On the fashion side, we not so long ago we did a great collaboration with a super high-end fashion designer called Christelle Cochet, and she made a range of clothing that was on the Paris catwalk. So we're trying to do things a little bit differently so that we can give exposure to our partners and our fan base that's slightly different to what other people are doing. We've also done stuff in motorsport. So last year we had a Wolves branded livery on one of the cars. We partnered with Gulf Racing, and one of the cars in the 24-hour Le Mans, albeit it was a virtual event, but had our livery, and we're hoping to do a little bit more in that space, and there's lots of opportunities ahead for that. So we're trying to not just be a football club, we're trying to do different things. And I think we look at the Red Bull model with huge admiration, and we think that might be a great future strategy for us. So Red Bull are no longer just a drinks company. They're an F1 team, they're an extreme sports series, an incredibly successful events company. They're a fashion brand now, they're Alpha Tauri clothing range. They've got multiple football clubs in Europe and in the US, and they're basically a group of companies now that stands the brand up financially, and that model is really attractive to us in being able to build that ecosystem that supports and underpins the football club. To my knowledge, no other Premier League club is operating in this way, and we think that it gives us an advantage. So when we're talking to potential sponsors now, they're not just talking about our ability to reach football fans. They're speaking to us about what we're doing in esports, whether they can be on car liveries in our motorsport sort of activities and things like that. So it gives us an ability to set ourselves apart from a lot of the clubs that we're around. So that's the model for future success. Whether that's something other clubs and brands do within sport, I guess only time will tell. But that's certainly where we as a football club and as a business are trying to set ourselves aside and moving forward to give ourselves a bit of a competitive edge.
Well, a huge thank you to all of our panelists. It's been absolutely fantastic to hear your thoughts and on the challenges facing the game. We've obviously, time is pushing on, but I wondered if we could possibly just move to the first question, and if the panel would consider, you should all be muted at the moment, I think, but if you wouldn't mind just unmuting yourselves when we're ready to ask the question. So the first question: should the Big Six face punishment from the Premier League for their actions? And if so, what should this punishment be? And how realistic could it be that it's enforced? So any of the panelists, over to you, Gary. There we go. You should be there, Gary.
I think the most important thing is to stop it happening in the future. I mean, you go and punish them. Is it in the rules that they can be punished? They didn't actually break away. They had meetings and they were planning to do it, but they didn't actually do it. And, I know everybody's angry with them, but I think that the most essential thing in my book is to make sure that this cannot happen again.
I'm not a lawyer, but under European Union law, I don't think you could punish the clubs. And I guess in that sense, it's going to be a test for the UK legal system post-Brexit, whether clubs can be punished in this way, and whether the clubs themselves can defend against it. So whether we say yes, we think it should happen, or no, we shouldn't think it shouldn't happen. In legal terms, there are some really interesting issues, unresolved interesting issues, I think.
Well, the thing is, Simon, do they need to be punished? I mean, you go to court, it costs money. The only people who ever win at courts are lawyers, both sides. You ask Coventry City and Wasps about that. They didn't actually break away, and what they did was completely wrong. But I think the most essential thing is to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Any other panelists want to add anything?
I think so. We everyone talks about the top six. We finished 7th last 2 seasons, so I think we're just slightly out of that. And it's not it's not for me or I guess Wolves to sort of say whether there should be a punishment or what that should be. I think that the thing I'd say is this has been a massive misjudgment by actually quite a small handful of people. And I've got really good colleagues at a lot of these football clubs who, were nothing to do with this, and whole clubs are being tarnished by what's happened. And there's actually a lot of really good people doing really good work at these football clubs. So, I think it was great that it came and went very, very quickly. And to Gary's point, I hope it's not something that we see in the future. But in terms of the punishment, I'll let the others who decide that get on with that job.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, Chris, one thing that I would say is we've spent a lot of time, and I don't mean we today, but the community in general, celebrating the defeat and imploring whoever is concerned never to let it happen again. But the reality is it did happen. And there are reasons why it happened, and those reasons haven't gone away. They're very interesting, and I kind of alluded to those earlier. But there's also this point about on what basis did it fall apart? So you spend 3 years planning something. So we're talking about intelligent people backed very often by very rich, powerful organizations and states planning something for 3 years, and within 48 hours it fell apart. Now, for me, that's just utter nonsense. Whatever we think has happened, something more significant has gone on. So one version of events is that Vladimir Putin called Abramovich and said, "Don't do this." And what's really interesting is in amongst the furore of the days in which the Super League was announced, Alexander Zhukov, who was the president of Gazprom, a UEFA Champions League sponsor. And what we also missed is the Champions League proposals being announced at the same time. So Zhukov was elected onto the UEFA Executive Committee. And the story is that Putin had said to Abramovich, this will damage Russian interest. Now, with due respect to everybody in the room, no amount of fan reviews and improved club management and collective spirit is going to be able to handle some of the consequences of people like Putin and the Abu Dhabi government and the New York Stock Exchange intervening in the game. And I wonder whether the government, in spite of its political opportunism, if I can put it that way, it's going to stop this. And whilst many people say we don't want it to come back, I take a very different view. Is it will come back. It'll come back in a different way.
Simon, we can disappear up our own bottoms on this one. The fact of the matter is that we've got control of the game here. It was shown when these 6 tried to do it, the fans, the Prime Minister, people in other clubs, came and went. The big incentive for punishing these people was the reaction from everybody. I mean, Putin's not going to decide what happens in football in this country. I mean, he
just did.
Well, he didn't really, to be honest.
He did, because we've got a webinar and we're talking about it. He did, and that's the reality.
Sorry, Simon, you're talking about it. The fact of the matter is, I think the game has got control. It was shown by the fans, the clubs, and the other owners that we have control of our game. The biggest problem is dealing with FIFA and UEFA at times. And I think you go and punish them. They're punished now. The reaction that the Glaziers and particularly John Henry had has punished them. We don't need to actually trot out a big fine that they then legally dispute. And I think, it's been and gone. And people say they'll never forget it. They will forget it. When the Premier League started breaking away, everyone got uptight about it and then they accept it. And it's like politics, everything blows over and moves on. And I just think we need to move forward now. They're not going to do it again. They've had a shock with the reaction. And I just think that, that's the final thing I'll say on it, I just think punishment is a waste of time because they've been punished.
Any other last comments from our panelist on that one?
Yeah, well, couldn't disagree more. That's. I'll just leave it at that.
I feel we should have a spin-off webinar with yourself, Simon and Gary. That'd be a new series there. Did anyone else wish to say anything else on the topic?
Yeah, I was just going to slightly off at a tangent, but I think the interesting thing will be is what happens not immediately, but in the medium term with the likes of the Glazers and the Henry owners, because there's different types of owners amongst those six, as there are across the Premier League. And the Glazers and the Henrys are there as a business. They're there for profit. And if they believe that the European Super League is dead and that thereby the value of that asset has reached its pinnacle, will they stay around or will they sell at the top and move on? And clearly some of the other owners amongst those big six are there for different reasons. They're not there for clear profit reasons. So I think that will be quite telling over the next 2 or 3 years to see if those clubs are still owned by the same people.
Ashley, can I just ask you one thing about that? That you had an owner who was only in it for the money, Milan Mandaric.
Yep, absolutely. He's one of the football club owners in recent history that's managed to own 3 clubs and make a profit out of all 3 of them in this country. So yeah, very, very smart operator.
So moving on to another topic, has financial fair play worked? And is it? I mean, has it been temporarily paused because of COVID, or is it going to be? Is it going to kickstart again? Are the clubs still bound by it?
What's going to happen to Derby? Anybody on the panel know what's going to happen to Derby?
Well, if we look at, I mean, it's not particularly popular with a lot of people, but if we look at what's happened to other clubs and you look at the rules, they should probably be deducted points in this season and thereby be relegated. Whether that happens is another matter.
That answers the question, I think.
Yeah. I mean, Chris, if you look at the origins of financial European financial fair play, this came out of the previous controversy around a proposed breakaway Super League and the dissolution of the G14. And this was really Platini and Infantino who dealt with this situation, and this led to the FFP regulations being introduced. And FFP again it's very, very difficult to manage. It has to be a consensual decision because again, under European Union law, and obviously keeping in mind that Real Madrid and Paris Saint-Germain, Bayern Munich are still members of the European Union, it's hard for our governing body to regulate these organizations in the same in a way that we would like to, because you wouldn't do it in food retailing, you wouldn't do it in engineering, so why would you do it in football? So that's one thing. For me, the purpose of financial fair play was never to control, it was to moderate. And that was the crucial thing. It was about moderating behavior. And obviously in this country now, we have kind of wage to turnover guidelines. And again, that's an attempt to moderate rather than to control. And this is always very difficult legally and organizationally to enforce. And so I think rather than talking about controlling, we're talking about moderating. The difficulty we have, and I go back to the previous points that were being made, is we've now got investors who are not just American. We've got investors from Qatar, we've got investors from Abu Dhabi, from China, from Russia. And to enforce rules upon organizations that are operating transnationally is very, very difficult. And we've seen this with Amazon and taxation and Starbucks and taxation. It's very hard for domestic organizations or even continental organizations to govern them. And what I find interesting about all of this is it's actually the Qatari guy who now chairs UEFA's executive committee, who's a member of the Qatari government. So we're not just talking about US private equity investors. We're also talking about others who are linked to states, who are not just invested for football reasons. They're controlling our institutions. They're operating transnationally, and this poses real challenges about what happens to, for example, financial fair play.
Football, Simon, does have powers that businesses don't have. It has its internal rules, and you can't fine somebody at work. You either discipline them or sack them. Football managers can fine players up to 2 weeks' wages. I mean, football does have its own internal governing system. I can't think of any business where you can fine one of your employers 2 weeks' wages. I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think, as we've agreed, Gary, is under European Union law, there are certain things that football clubs potentially are exposed. Restraint of trade, and you think about the Bosman ruling as the obvious example. I think for me now, what's really interesting in English terms is or in British terms is what we're no longer bound by the European Union. So as my view is, it shouldn't just be a fan-led review that the government is going to. What is the government going to do to protect a national asset? Because it's not just fans. It's also about socio-cultural institutions. It's part of our history, our heritage, and the government has an opportunity to implement different laws, different rules that govern football.
Yeah, there are rules that are brought in, or laws that people don't quite understand. I was quite interested. I mean, Ashley made a lot of good points, but he queried parachute payments. I mean, the reason why parachute payments were brought in, not necessarily a good reason, but the very reason they were brought in is because if you take somebody like Wolves, for instance, they could have, just using them as an example, they could have players on 3-year contracts and they're pretty sure they're going to stay in the Premier League. But every year, except for this year, some team you don't expect, it was nearly Newcastle, gets sucked into relegation and gets relegated. And then they're stuck. It's no good saying you're going to pay these players. They're getting wise to it now, football clubs. But in the past, it was no good saying to them, you should have a clause that if they go in the Championship, they only earn half of it. They didn't used to have those clauses. And the parachute payments were put in purely, and that's why they were limited to 1 season, 2 seasons, 3 seasons, to help them. I'm not saying this is a good reason, by the way, Simon, but I'm just saying that they were put in to help those clubs survive because of their stupid contracts in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it, Gary? Because I was thinking last night about my team and the teams that are going up. So, have you got? I've forgotten who's going up. Watford,
Norwich City,
Norwich, Watford, and possibly Bournemouth. Possibly Bournemouth.
The third one hasn't been sorted yet.
Yeah, but possibly Bournemouth. So the same 3 will go up as came down, and I thought, well, from a Middlesbrough fan's point of view, this looks like a Super League to me.
Yeah, but it doesn't happen every season. That doesn't, Simon. It's and there's no guarantee the third team won't be Swansea, for instance, who've been down a fair while now. I mean, I understand parachute payments, but I think now, and certainly I think that's probably the views of the panel, they have enough warning now to have, and West Bromwich have got it in, I think, to have clauses that if you play in the Championship, you only get half the money. Of course, the result of that is you lose all your players. I think I was talking to Sam Allardyce the other day, and a lot of his players on loan will go back to their clubs. A lot of players are at the end of the contract and they're not prepared to take the wage drops if they can get fixed. I mean, Pereira's a good example, I suppose. He'll go to a Premier League club. But it's a good point. But I do think that parachute payments are outdated. I think Ashley brought that up, or you brought it up. I think they're outdated now.
And would you replace it with anything, Ashley, if you got rid of the parachute payments, or is it kind of, you're on your own club? So what would you recommend?
Well, I don't think you do, but I think you have to enforce those relegation clauses in contracts. I mean, a lot of clubs pretty sensible and have them now, but the ones that don't will tell you that the reason they don't is to give them more leverage when they're trying to sign players. So if those are enforced, if every player contract has them in, the clubs don't lose that. They don't lose that leverage. Everyone's playing off the same playing field. So I think that's all you need to balance it out. And then, you know, as Gary talked about potentially losing your players, you will, but there's a market and there's also squad caps. So only so many of those players will be deemed good enough to go back in the Premier League. And if they are, all the best to them. But, you know, there'll be a natural market of players, and some will go back to the Premier League, some will stay playing in the Championship because that's their level until they play for a team that gets promoted.
Yeah, thank you. There's a comment that we've had from Brett in the chat. Given Anne-Marie's relationship management approach, I'd love to hear her thoughts on how to approach this Super League matter too. Over to you, Anne-Marie. Oh, sorry, have I just muted you?
No, sorry, I was doing it at the same time. So. No, I don't mind answering that at all. It will be with my relationship head-on and not really a football head-on. And don't laugh, actually, but I was thinking when you were talking about should they be punished or not, I just reverted it in my head. Well, if a child does something wrong or it's seen to be really wrong, you think, oh, we'll punish them. But actually, in life, you're not necessarily taught about punishing. It should be sort of, well, I think actually they've probably realised, they probably had a little punishment them anyway. Their fans turned against them. They probably lost a chunk that we won't ever hear about and they won't necessarily know. But there's a knock-on effect that, you know, parents talk to children, talk to uncles, talk to grandparents, and as that fizzles through, it will carry on being spoken about more so than we ever probably will know. So they will lose out financially they'll lose financially, but they'll lose I don't know, a little bit of what they like. They like the team spirit and what the football game's all about and the pulling together. From how I think it should be dealt with, it's learning from it, probably. I don't think you can't turn the clock back. It might happen again, it might not. So from me, that was how I was thinking. I think actually charging them a big fine is not going to make any difference whatsoever. It's not a punishment. So that was my little view.
Thank you. Well, I think it's worth saying at this point that obviously the point that was made earlier about the average wages for average footballers, I am a mildly disgruntled Tottenham Hotspur supporter at the moment. And I think that was my own frustrations with a year under Mr. Mourinho, but never mind.
Just one more thing from that. And I know it's not really the Midlands teams, but I think the National League, like Solihull Moors, for example, we might actually benefit from that. Like I said about being somebody's second club, if they don't want to go there as much, but they want to come to their second club's choice, we might benefit from the things like that happen in the higher leagues.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other comments from the panel on that one at all? I suppose just finally, I'm really conscious of time, but we touched upon it slightly, obviously, with some of Ashley's responses, but is it time for supporters to have representation on company boards, or is this just going to be, is it a real tick box exercise?
I think I've got quite strong feelings about that, but I think that supporters are very important to start with. And I should have actually mentioned, and I'm glad Ashley did, the games were different. I think everyone's mentioned that without any spectators. They are very important, but customers are very important in supermarkets. They don't have the financial responsibilities. They wouldn't dream of putting their houses up as collateral. And I think it's very important to listen to the supporters. The good thing about COVID is it's underlined to everybody, including owners, how important supporters are. I haven't enjoyed watching 4 matches a day without any spectators. And I was at the cup final on Saturday, and it was a whole new ball game with spectators there. But it's a passion. I hear all about it, takes over your lives. I mean, it's been my life, it's been my work. So I don't I love the game, but I have a slightly different approach than people who switch off from their job to follow football. I do not believe, I'm sorry, I feel quite strongly about this, in having fans as directors of major football clubs. They'll be asking about the bloody manager's future, and they'll be talking about, why don't you spend any more money? Why don't they spend their money? Well, they haven't got it. And if you're going to own a racehorse, you've got to have money to have it. You've got, you can query the owners. I think so. I'll repeat myself. Supporters' input are important to listen to them. You don't have to do what they say necessarily, but they don't have the financial burdens or financial responsibilities. They are customers. Listen to the customers, otherwise they'll disappear. But running it, sorry, I can't see that happening, and I don't think it should happen.
Thank you, Gary.
I'm not surprised to think that I disagree with Gary. First thing I'll say is that there is naturally a huge amount of owners that do really put their own money in. There are clearly
that's besides the point, Ashley. I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt you, but
it's not beside the point, because you were talking about financial commitment and directors having to make a financial commitment. So that was why I was making that point, is that not all owners actually really do put in a financial commitment. But as part of why are they valid? They're a very valid voice at a board level, and to think that everybody that would be a supporter director would argue about the manager or want to sign the latest big striker is somewhat unfair to football fans. There's some excellent supporter directors already out there across the Football League and below. I've been a director myself at Portsmouth for 4 and a bit years. We dragged the club up from the absolute depths of nothing with no infrastructure, rebuilt it and got promoted out of League Two, balanced the books and made a profit over 4 years. So supporters can do a job on boards. They have a particular voice and a connection. And one of the reasons that they're perhaps important at the big clubs is we have boards in this country where we have very autocratic owners, and some boards where there's only actually one person on the board. And having that alternate voice, the person that understands the heritage, has the connection with the club and the community, can be a very valid input for the benefit of the club. We have to be careful if we do it, and particularly if we mandate it, that we don't create tokenism, and that's the concern, that it is a tick box exercise, or in fact you end up putting somebody in a position where they're not wanted by the owner. And that is a concern, and that's perhaps one of the problems that might happen if it's mandated, as opposed to something that clubs are starting to do voluntarily. And interestingly, the fallout of the European Super League, we've already seen 2 or 3 of those 6 clubs appoint at various levels between observer and actual directors, supporters on boards.
But Ashley, I'm going to take a little bit of issue with you there. You did a great job saving Portsmouth, but Portsmouth isn't necessarily your average football club in this country. And the other thing is that if you're going to have supporters on big clubs, when you say that it's not necessarily their money, you've got to remember that most of these owners are billionaires, and the banks will lend them the money because they've got other ways of getting it back. You know, unless you're, I don't know whether you're a millionaire, it's none of my business. But a bank lending money would want to know. They are the hardest people in the world, banks, to deal with, as businessmen will tell you, particularly during COVID. And, you know, it's not just that simple being a director of a big football club. We're not talking about a village team or something else. When we're talking about fan ownership, that's got to include the 18 Premier League clubs. You can't just have rules for Championship or League One or League Two. You've got to have rules if you're having fans throughout football. And I'm sorry, but people are not going to back the average fan who wants to be on the board with the fortunes of a football club. The fact that football clubs are run badly is another argument, but there's no guarantee. And then if you get fans on board, who is going to be on? Because then you get into the diversity. Why is a man fan a director of a football club? Why isn't it a lady? Why isn't it somebody from the ethnic community? I mean, you know,
I think they talk about doing elections at some clubs, I think, as well. Isn't that the idea?
I don't know. I'm not aware of that.
So can I just say something? I mean, there is a trend in business generally nowadays for there to be representation by, for example, consumers on the board.
What, Waitrose?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you think about John Lewis, I mean, it's, in essence, that is the organisation anyway. So, businesses with employees or consumers on the board is not entirely unusual, but more generally, in the spirit of a multi-stakeholder approach, there are consumers on boards. I think there's a difference between being a director and being a member of the board, and that's something else. But I think the other thing as well, I mean, I was just Googling, I forgot the guy's name, Lord Jim O'Neill. Lord Jim O'Neill, who's a Manchester United fan, government advisor. If he was sat on the board of my football club as a fan, I would actually be quite pleased, because incredibly intelligent, very successful. I think obviously there's something about the mechanisms that would be used through which fans sit on boards and what purpose they would play. But personally, I do prefer, this is not a binary choice. It's not between football people and football fans, because it's a multi-stakeholder business or industry, if we put it that way. So the people who live close to football stadiums, they may not be fans, but they're impacted by stadiums. They're impacted by the activity. Should there be community representation? I think there's also something about fans needing to understand the importance of sponsors and broadcasters. So, in terms of multi-stakeholder,
what you have to ask yourself is, what are they going to add? What are they actually going to add to a business? Now, if you're an employee who's on the board, and for instance, Leicester City have promoted their head of media, Anthony Hurley, onto the board, that's a different argument. But you take somebody from outside whose sole involvement with that club has been as a supporter, paying his season tickets or paying his admission. This is what concerns me, that football has got enough problems, but this fan has a passion for the football club. He has a passion for the players. He's probably at some time during his following of the club demanded the removal of the manager and the chairman. I mean, why do you, and Ashley will probably tell me why, but why, what are they going to actually add that's going to make a difference to that club? They've got their opinions and they can challenge things, but, do they know the whole workings? Do they know exactly how the chief executive of Coventry City, Dave Boddy, for instance, do you know his daily jobs? What's he responsible for? Do you know how much money the owners have put in? I mean, all this revolves around the passion and love of football. You don't want to be a director of Tesco's, and they probably wouldn't let you, even if you spend £1,000 a year there. And it's sometimes in football, and that's why football clubs get into trouble with money, because they're so desperate to win. And the pressure to win comes partly from their ego, but more often than not from the supporters. You've got 30,000 people screaming for you to buy this player, buy that player. And it's just a personal view, I may be wrong, but I just can't see what a member of the fans section is going to bring to a club. Consult them, talk to them, by all means. And I know you did it. I know you did that with Portsmouth, and you should be admired for that. Save the club. But a policy to put fans on the board, not for me.
So Lord Jim O'Neill, Manchester United fan, worked for Goldman Sachs, educated at Sheffield University. He shouldn't sit on the board either. No,
listen, Simon, you're talking about one person. This rule about fans on the board has to be across the board.
Yeah, but there are lots of people like him out there.
It's up to Manchester United if they.
There are lots of people like him out there.
Gents,
Ashley's one of them.
Anne-Marie, over to you.
Right. I've only got experience from Solihull Moors, but I've looked at, I know the board and the shareholders and the directors. They're all businessmen, actually, in their own right. So they run their own businesses, so they know how to run a business. They're very, very big fans, but they're also business savvy. So in my opinion, a board in any business, all the ones I've been involved in over the years, nobody would dream of putting somebody that wasn't able to do a board member's job on a board. You go there for a purpose, and you have to do what you do well, or else you don't go on. So I would have thought that a board in football could be made up of fans, but they have to be able to add something from a business point of view. And when you sit around a boardroom table, there needs to be not just the title, the finance director, the this, that, and the other. There has to be a balance of what they're going to add. From a psychological point of view, it's the soft skills, not just what's on paper. So a board formation can have fans there, but they need to be business savvy, trained.
Totally agree.
But like you say, it's about the mechanisms, isn't it? About the way in which, whether or not it's done by a fan base who decide that, if you look at, as an example, if you look at Arsenal with Arsenal Fan TV, they might decide actually they want to put their most charismatic person up onto the board. Then you may have issues around their suitability for a board, as an example. But they could use other mechanisms potentially, and that wasn't just a criticism of Arsenal. Just
Chris, I'm not against what Simon's saying about Mr. O'Neill. What I'm against is the ruling which the government are trying to do, that there has to be a fan on the board. I totally get what Simon says. I totally get what Ashley's done. And I totally support what Anne-Marie says. But the compulsory situation, no, that's what I'm against. If a club wants to invite a fan that they think is really good, and maybe Manchester United should listen to what Simon's saying, that's a different argument. It's the principle, that, just to stress that I'm against.
Oh, thank you so much, Gary. And I'm extremely conscious of time. Vinny, did you have anything you were pressing to say, and then we'll wrap it up, James? Thank you. And Anne-Marie, my big brother.
Fascinating topic, and a really interesting one. I know our owners believe that if you buy 100% of something, it's your prerogative to decide who runs it. And I think there is also an assumption that you find this fan to represent the fans, and every fan is going to buy into that person's viewpoint and opinions. I think actually it can be quite divisive. There's lots of topics where fans amongst themselves can't agree on stuff. So I don't necessarily think it's a quick fix. We have a fans parliament, and I've seen firsthand that people who are close in the running of that are actually quite divisive figures amongst our fan base, and that in itself brings infighting, and it's not a straightforward thing. It's just assume you can put this guy on the board and that'll be great, then every fan will buy into their way of thinking. I think for us as a club, what's really important is that we've got to get our consultation right, whether that's with a board member or whether it's just good consultation. We're always looking at ways of improving that. So we have now a number of focus groups that are around key topics for us. We have a match day experience group that's been going a couple of years. There's about 25, 30 fans who are on that, who feed into what we do on a match day, and they've brought some really great initiatives off their own back. So we had some of you may have seen one of our players, Raul Jimenez, had a horrible head injury earlier this season, and the match day experience group off their own back went into a frenzy and bought this and created this great banner that we put up at Molineux that was a huge Fuerza Raul banner. And that's a great example of where fans can really impact and have a say on what's going on within the club. So that's been a great success. We're rolling that out now across other areas such as retail, ticketing, equality, diversity and inclusion. So I think that, we could have, across those 4 topics, we could have up to 100, 150 fans who are taking part in those discussions. And I think if you've got really solid consultation and you're listening to your fans and you're acting on the things that they're clearly telling you, that should be enough that you've got people on board.
Well, thank you so much, Vinny, and thank you to all of our panellists. I can only apologise that we've slightly run over, but I just didn't feel I could shut down the debate before we managed to get on some of these topics. So again, a huge thank you to all of our panellists, to Gary as well. Thank you all, and we'll obviously be sharing these clips online as well. So again, thank you to everyone. Thank you to everyone that came today, and please keep following the Centre for the New Midlands as well. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
The Centre for the New Midlands is the only independent, not-for-profit think tank serving the Midlands region of the United Kingdom. Launched in 2020, our areas of interest include housing and communities, digital culture, media and sport, the Great Recovery, environment, transport and infrastructure, devolution and governance. Our initial focus is on the West Midlands. In 2021, we're launching Reimagining the Region, a regional networking group to give the West Midlands an even stronger voice. We want you to help shape the agenda for the region and work with us to create new ideas to build a stronger and more prosperous society. We will provide you with a regional network of other forward-looking organisations interested in enhancing the region in which we operate. For more information and to get involved, visit our website